This video was done by a professional videographer, Mark Birnbaum, to commemorate the reopening of the Hall of State, essentially, back in 2019, right? So you're going to see part of the restoration, which is going to be art in the Hall of State. The original video is about 50 minutes. Mark and I worked together to edit down to 25 minutes, which I think will be much more art than architecture or other things that were in the original 50 minutes. There will be a part where it looks like the video ends. Don't get up, because there's a second part to the video that I think you'll find very, very interesting. And after the video, we'll have a talk by Veletta Lill, who is the board chair for the Dallas Historical Society, which put together the video, original Hall of State video, because the Dallas Historical Society operates the Hall of State in Fair Park. Veletta is also a former city councilwoman and kind of the guru of historic preservation in Dallas and probably broader in Texas too. And she'll be coming up after the video. There'll probably be a couple-minute break to get everybody set up for her talk. But I hope you enjoy the video. I've seen it quite a few times, and I am mesmerized every time I see it. So if you don't like the editing, let me know, because it was my project. Without further ado, the Hall of State video. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. On a personal note, I was on the board of the Dallas Historical Society way back when, so it's a special treat for me to see the video in the Hall of State. But on a more personal note, Deborah and I got married in front of that Great Seal in So Veletta Lill is going to give a talk on the women artists of the Hall of State, Dorothy Austin, Allie, Tennant, and Polly Smith.
It turns out I'm a historic landmark as well, and I have injured my hip. But like the Hall of State, I will soon be restored. I'm going to talk to you briefly at a very high level about 3 women artists that I'm pretty fond of who worked specifically in the Hall of State. And I've developed an affection for them. Just so you know, looking at the Hall of State, in 2017, the citizens of Dallas approved $14.4 million to restore the Hall of State. After the redo, we were at $18 million for the restoration. The Great Hall that you see in this image was a workroom for 20 months. It is where the artists, the conservators, the architects, et cetera, worked. As I said, this was a 20-month process between the 2 projects. It only took 9 months to build her. A lot of discussion today about women artists and their place in the Pantheon. And specifically, as I said, I'm going to talk about 3 women. But there were 7 women who worked in the hall, worked on the Centennial out of 51 artists. And actually, a survey was done in 1980, and we discovered there were almost twice as many women artists in 36 in Texas as there were men. However, that was not the ratio in the Centennial. You will notice in this particular image, and this is from the Centennial collection, there is one woman. She is number 10. sort of diminutively placed. I think they have her sitting on the floor. Her name is Lois Lignell, she was the daughter of one of the architects who worked there. And interestingly enough, she was the assistant to the assistant of Lawrence Tenney Stevens, who worked on the Esplanade sculptures. So that kind of shows you how important they thought women artists were at the time. The first woman I want to talk about is Allie Victoria Tenet. And I love this image of Allie sitting with the Tejas warrior, and you saw Robert Marshall restoring the Tejas warrior. And I find Miss Tennant to be extremely interesting, and she played a big role, really, in the Dallas art scene for her life, which is different than the other two women I'm going to talk about. She moved to Texas during her teenage years and attended Dallas High School. If you are from here, Old Dallas High School has been recently restored. It is at Pearl and Bryan at the Dart Line, and it is the home of Perkins and Will architecture firm now. And beautiful, beautiful building. She attended that high school and found opportunity there because there were art classes. And this was the first school in Dallas to actually have art classes. And Margaret Culbertson, who was really only a little older than her students, was the woman who taught art, and it was basically technical. This school later became known as Crozier Tech because it was a technical school. So there was always a focus on the technical. She decides early on she will become a professional artist, which the other two women we're going to talk about, their lives change and they do not live out their lives as truly as artists. They retire, so to speak. But she was a woman of means in terms of her family. She had artists in her family. Her father largely did it as a hobby, if you will, but was a painter and so forth. And one of her ancestors was of some prominence, landscape painter from Britain. She develops really an interest in sculpture. She loves art in general. She found the way to really manifest that was through women's groups. And she belonged to the Dallas Women's Forum, which if you live here, that building is also around. It's on Ross Avenue at about Annex, and you can still go in and see that space. But it was the place where women gathered, literary discussions, arts, and so forth. She later studies in New York, travels to Europe, and eventually she is asked to participate in the Texas Centennial Exposition. It did not hurt that her brother was a prominent businessman as well, and sort of hanging around with the R.L. Thorntons and people like that. But she really lived a wonderful life and became more than an artist. She became an advocate, and she was a good friend of Jerry Bywater's and many of the artists of the time, and lived out her life as an advocate and an artist. The iconic work today you've already seen has been restored. I took a package to the American Airlines freight office about 2 years ago, I guess, and there was the Tejas warrior on a poster. So it truly is iconic. The next woman is probably the least known. It's a woman by the name of Dorothy Austin. She did a couple of things, not on this building, but on the Dallas Museum of fine art. She did the grills to the doors. But she also did the cowboy, the carved cowboy in the West Texas room. She studied at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts and the Art Students League of New York. The common theme among these women is they all studied in New York at some point. She was a prize-winning entry in the annual exhibition of the State Fair of Texas. Until recently, I did not realize the prominence of the State Fair of Texas in encouraging artists, and many of the pieces that came from these exhibitions at the State Fair are in the collection of the Dallas Museum of Art today. She worked in wood, stone, and plaster, developed a direct style of carving. She created the bronze doors on what was then the Dallas Museum of Fine Art at Fair Park, and it faces the lagoon. You can still see them today, although they also need to be restored. She exhibited in places like MoMA in New York, the Art Institute of Chicago, the New York World's Fair. The quote in an article that was done by the Dallas Museum of Art, people said, "Why did you quit?" And she said, I don't know if these are the words I would have said, but she said, "I don't know. It was the war. I don't know. I shot my wad." That was the exact words that she said. So, Dorothy was a character. She lived to be 100 years old. And Valley House actually, in 1999, and she died in 2011, in 1999, did a retrospective. She was still alive. So she was a character in her own right. There is the cowboy that you can see. Those doors, the only reason I show you is you saw the doors in the film, and the restoration of these kinds of doors and the thousands and thousands of pieces that are in the doors is really quite a bit of work. The final woman is a woman by the name of Polly Smith, who I love, and Mark has done a short video on her oratones. A book has been done by Evelyn Barker, and at the end I have resources. You can actually find the book online. And this is Polly as she traveled around. She was somewhat itinerant from a big family, seven kids. You will know one of her brothers, which was a man by the name of C.R. Smith that formed American Airlines. But she had other prominent family members, dress designers, artists, etc. She studied, she loved art in high school, joined the photo club in Austin, but eventually she finds herself studying at the Clarence Hudson White School of Photography in New York. You may know that. Dorothy Lignell studied there, Margaret Burke White, etc. Some discussion was they were there at the same time. They were not. And Clarence was deceased by the time that she went. But it was an extremely prominent photography school, and it taught it from an artist rather than technical aspect. She is contracted by the Texas Centennial, and the contract is on the right. She was to do photographs. She was paid $500 a month, which would be over $10,000 a month in today's money. She was contracted to travel the back roads of Texas and photograph Texas in its myth and majesty. And at that time, Texas had 18,000 lane miles of roads, half of which were not paved. She was contracted to go and take these photographs. She appears in everything from House Beautiful to Vogue and Harper's Bazaar, but she also appears in, I think it was called Peanut and Nut World, and a number of they were agricultural magazines is what they were. But she also, her images are seen at Neiman Marcus. She really is, I think of her as more of she's a contemporary of Dorothea Lange and Gordon Parks. She's in that milieu. And she captures all of these images. Texas Parade magazine called her one of Texas's finest artists with a camera. She traveled with a 17-pound Graflex camera around her neck, drove a truck, and developed her images in the back of a truck. She, after the centennial, does Dallas Aviation School at Love Field, really contract photography work. She eventually returns to Austin to study sculpture and more or less gives up photography. She falls ill, moves to California with her sister, and never is to be seen essentially again. These are Polly's oratones, so they develop from the images that we have a number of images in the archives at the Dallas Historical Society, but 18 oratones were created, and they're in the walls of the Hall of State, and you can see them mounted on the picture on the right, on the image on the right, the one on the left. Very much she takes pictures of a lot of men at work. She takes pictures of, she's given a long list. Bring me back, picture of a Native American, so she's got members of the Alabama tribe and so forth. But these oratones, which is a process that basically takes the negative, and it is an emulsion of gelatin silver emulsion, and basically it is transferred to glass rather than to paper, which you would have a photograph, which gives it a romantic gold tone, thus the word orotones. This was done a lot in Europe. These are 3 times of the size of any that we know in America. And George Dahl's granddaughter said to me, "Oh, they're all illuminated from behind." I was like, okay. And we took them off the wall, and they aren't. It's truly their own illumination. This is after the water. So you can see them attempting to take them down. And you can see their scale by Dennis. He's one of the contractors there, taking him down. So they are currently being restored. This is the last project of the restoration. This is the only one we have left. And they were sort of a victim of the times. The conservator got long COVID. Supply chain issues that we dealt with in terms of the frames. We had to remake the frames to be mounted back into the wall. So it's been quite a journey, but if you make a trip to the Hall of State, I urge you to go find those photographs. And you can see exhibitions occur around them a lot of times, so they recess into the background, but they are truly amazing. In the flood, basically, it's the humidity that impacted them. We had one that was broken, and a surrogate had to be created. We had to get we've had to find an antique emulsion recipe, if you will. The glass had to be cut in New Hampshire and brought to us. But the surrogate has been created. So take a look at the ones that are still on the wall. There are 9 not on the wall and 9 that are on the wall that haven't been restored yet. The images I show there are just some of the work that had to be restored. And everything in this building is largely done by an artist. The valances in every room, the murals, the light standards, the doors, the ceilings, everything about it is truly unique. And as someone who goes there on a regular basis, at least once a week or more, I find new pieces of art in that space. And I find them from men and women that you may not know or have never heard of again. But they made an impact on Texas. So please take a look. Thank you.
So we've got a couple of minutes before we call it a night, I guess. Any questions for Veletta or me about the Deborah?
It's not a question. I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you.
I was told by a member of the bond committee when I went to get this money, and I saw her after the restoration, she goes, "You were relentless." Thank you.
Any questions? I can't see because, yeah.
Thank you so much. It's fabulous. I wonder when the due date or the expected date for the remainder of the org.
For the remainder of the oratones, let's see. They need to be done before the fair. Everything needs to be done.
And also for the photographs generally, that Polly Smith did, where are they these days?
You can find, we have negatives and some of her photographs and ours, and then they are dispersed around the country there is a book, and do we have the next, could I have the next, it's not your job, it's mine. Evelyn Barker wrote the book, A Texas Journal, the Centennial Photographs. That book, and we have them at the Hall of State, but you can also order them online, and you can see sort of many of the photographs of her time that are still around. Some would be sent, someone would ask for them in New York, she would send, and they're gone. So there's a certain amount of them that we don't, that are lost to history. The image of the black children that we had to do this surrogate of when we redid, we only had a print of that. We did not have it, and we took the print and got a high quality print, and we're able to do an orotone from that. But there are a few places that you can today, except for the Hall of State, go find Polly's work.
There's another question there.
Now, where did the money come from for the restoration after you had bond money used up?
The bond money was used up. The city got some money because of the freeze. They got some money from the state of Texas, and then private donations, grants. State Fair of Texas has a grant program. They help a little bit with things. They actually did the original ramp when we restored. So it came from the city, grants, philanthropy.
$4 million?
Yep. We now have a generator installed on the top of the building. The pipes were in a heated space, but we did not have power in Fair Park for almost 36 hours. And the kind of generator we need to warm that whole building, the city never bought one of those. So, but we now have one that will heat that crawl space should we have that problem again.
Anything else?
But you won't be doing
George.
you won't be doing fireworks off the top of the Hall of State anymore, for a
George.
good reason.
Yeah, I want to just clarify that the two people that have donated their time to be at the Hall of State today are both, they are members. They're here today. They've been at the symposium.
There she is, Christiana.
And so they work there, and their perspective and their knowledge of what they had to do and so forth on working on these historic Texas murals, you know, they're going to be there. So if you have time, it'll blow you away. You think the film is great. Go see it in person. See the doors that have been restored and imagine, you know, being transported back to 1936. If you've been there 3 years ago, you would saw the Hall of State like an old house that had been run down, and now it's restored to its original beauty. It is a jewel and that we should all treasure. We're here enjoying Texas art. That building is a Texas sculpture, and it's fantastic.
And I thank Christiana and Helen, but I also want to recognize Texera, which is the organization that they are both involved with, that really were the cavalry that rode to the rescue, with all volunteers. It's the equivalent of the Red Cross, only for art. And Texera, T-X-C-E-R-A. And I'm sure that Christiana will tell you more about it when you get to the Hall of State.
40 volunteers from the state of Texas. They are mostly involved in museums and institutions, and we train them on emergency responders for the arts. So as soon as the local first responders clear the building, we go in and we triage and guide the volunteers and try to stabilize the collection until they can be treated.
The only thing that we continue to watch is the Quanah Parker bag. Everything else, a lot of things went to Fort Worth and they were freeze-dried, things that were paper. A lot of things were protected, and it was the humidity that we needed to dry. So the one thing, the Quanah Parker bag, because it is multimedia, you've got the feathers and the leather and the beads and so forth. We are watching. We do have a conservator who can work on it that is in Oklahoma City, but we're letting it stabilize over time before the Juneteenth document is fine. This is the only signed Juneteenth document in existence, so if you get a chance, I think it will go on display on Friday, and we'll be there through the end of the month. So if you get a chance, go and look at, and we have it because of George Bannerman Dealey.
Thank you.
Thanks.